Blessings. Welcome to today's Law Enforcement Daily Devotional. Today we're in Acts. We're finishing Acts, chapters 27 and 28. And although this is a travel day filled with shipwreck and all kinds of stuff. And Paul eventually gets to Rome. So don't want to treat this like a travel day that's just all travel from beginning to end, because it's not. We do end, and there's a lot going on. Starting in chapter 27, verse 1, Paul's transferred. He's appealed to Caesar, and now he's transferred to a centurion named Julius, and they're gonna get on board this boat, and they're gonna begin to set sail for Rome. And some reading and research. This centurion was from the Augustan cohort. Now, a cohort was a military unit that comprised of 600 soldiers. Now, that was desirable. It probably didn't have 600 soldiers in it, just like centurions in Israel were supposed to be over 100 soldiers, but usually they had about anywhere from 40 to 60 in their command, because the army just was not fully staffed at that time. Either that or they were spread really thin trying to conquer the world. One source that I read said that this particular cohort probably consisted of Samaritan soldiers, which is really interesting because a lot of the Jews considered Samaritans their enemies. They considered Romans their enemies. So this particular cohort would have been really looked upon as an enemy of the Jewish people. But we see right here, Julius, we're going to see as it goes along that Julius was not Paul's enemy, not in the least. The centurions are always spoken of in a good light in the New Testament. It's interesting that every time you see one, their character and their integrity is of the utmost. I mean, they are the kind of leaders that most of us would like to follow. And it's pretty much the same um, for the Samaritans. They're usually, the Jews consider them enemies, but we see so many stories and so many things where they're not enemies. The Jews hate them, but that's not necessarily reciprocated. So anyway, verse 3, centurion Julius seems to have compassion on Paul in this verse, and we see further on he has compassion. In 11, Julius is forced to make a decision because they're going to try and sail at the end of the sailing season. It's about to become winter when you're supposed to dock your ship and you're not supposed to go any further. So the centurion has to weigh his options. Should we try and go further, or should we just stop and winter somewhere and get back on the sea when the weather's better? So he has advice from this prisoner named Paul, who says, oh no, we shouldn't sail. And then we have advice from this experienced captain of the ship that says, yeah, it's going to be fine. I can't blame the centurion for listening to the captain over Paul. I can blame the captain for making a bad judgment call and giving bad advice to the centurion. But nevertheless, all of verses 14 through 41, we see this story of being caught in the storm, and it does not go well for them. 42, the ship capsized, it runs aground, and it's about to break apart. And we see here, this is a big ship because it had 276 people on it. This was not some little boat. This is a big ship. So, and it's about to break apart, and people are afraid they're going to die. Well, the Roman soldiers, there's this law that if you allow a prisoner to escape, if you're responsible for a prisoner escaping, it's a death sentence for you as the soldier or the guardian of the jailer. We saw this in Acts chapter 12 when Herod went to, Paul was put in prison by Herod. The next day Herod wants to see Paul. Well, an angel has allowed Paul to escape. The jailers can't find him. Herod executes the jailers. We talked about this. Then in Acts 16 is the story of them being in prison. The earthquake comes, opens the jail door. The jailer comes, assumes everybody has escaped, so he's about to fall on his sword and kill himself because he knows it's a death penalty. And Paul stops him and says, "Hey, don't kill yourself. We're all still here." So these Roman soldiers, they're not doing this out of meanness or being upset or anything like that. I mean, it's their job that these prisoners cannot escape. So they're just doing their job, and they're about to execute these prisoners. But the centurion steps in against his orders and against what their law is, and says, "Don't kill them. We're going to take a chance that they're all going to wind up on the shore, and we're not going to lose anybody," because that's what Paul told us was going to happen. So he trusted Paul, and it happened just like Paul said. Nobody was hurt, nobody was lost, and they all make it to shore together. Interesting thing, when they get on shore, the locals come out and make a fire for them to warm them because they're wet and cold. And while Paul's gathering wood, a viper, a venomous snake, attaches itself to his hand. And he shakes it off in the fire, and all the locals know what kind of snake it is, and they're like, "He's a dead man." But Paul doesn't die. So then all of a sudden they say, "Oh, he must be a god." I think this gives Paul opportunity to preach on the creator of heaven and earth who protects him. Paul goes a step further and he heals people while he's on this island. And when they realize he can heal, man, they bring everybody to him and he heals them all. And I'm reading this thinking, what a great example to all his shipmates, the centurion and the Roman soldiers and the prisoners. How many of them came to know Christ from going to Paul going, "Hey, tell us what's happening here. Who is this God you worship? What's going on?" I just love the thought of 276 men on board this ship. How many of them were saved by Paul through these experiences? Anyway, Paul makes it to Rome. The believers come to him. The Jews come to him. Some believe in Jesus, some don't, just like everywhere he's been. And he stays there for 2 years. And he doesn't sit in a prison. He gets to be on house arrest with a Roman soldier living with him, and he's free to come and go as he pleases. And I like how it finishes out. It says Paul basically was able to rent his own quarters, which I think of as an apartment, with this Roman soldier living with him. But it says he was allowed to teach Christ with all openness, unhindered. Nobody stopped him. He was just allowed to preach the gospel to everyone. Tomorrow we're going to be in Ephesians chapters 1 through 3, and that's going to be fun too. I love Ephesians. So read up, come back here tomorrow, and in the meantime, be safe.